If ever there was a topic that gets me really excited, it is time management. And so in this session, we are going to be talking about a whole host of different techniques and tips and ideas and thinking really to enable us to optimize the value of time, because time for all of us is, I would argue, the most precious thing that we have. You can't give it back. Once it's gone, it's gone. And I would always say it is far better to invest time than spend time doing something. In other words, with an investment of time, you actually get a return, you get some value from the time that you take on particular items, projects, or activities. So far better to invest it and expect some kind of outcome, some kind of measure of success or enjoyment, than actually just spending time where there's nothing really clear that comes out of it. So let's explore some of these topics. But I mean, really, what we should do is begin really with the definition of what time management is, because from a professional perspective, it's really important to understand how this is going to play into our favor as we do our projects, as we do our campaigns, as we build our activities in business. So time management is the process of planning, organizing, and controlling how much time we spend on specific tasks or activities in order to, this is the important bit, work more efficiently and effectively. So it involves prioritizing tasks, goal setting, delegating as and where necessary, and of course, allocating time in a way that maximizes productivity. And that's a key thing that we're going to cover here, while reducing stress, because if you don't do this stuff properly, we all know that it's not good for our well-being. It's not good for our mental or physical health to overdo it. And there's lots of phrases that can describe that. So good time management will help individuals and the teams in which we play to meet deadlines, achieve objectives, and of course, maintain a very healthy work-life balance by making the most, you could use the word optimize, the time available. So this is important stuff. It really is important. I said at the outset, it's one of my favorite topics because it is actually, when you go deeper into it, really fascinating how people do use time, how they misuse time, how they neglect time, but also how some people really seem to just have so much time. You look at, high performing athletes, tennis players, for example, who, seem to have so much more time on the ball. They seem to not have to rush stuff. Somebody like Roger Federer, for example, made the sport of tennis look so effortless because of the use of time, always being in the right place, always being well prepared, being immaculate in the preparation for every moment, and then executing with accuracy. And that is really the kind of thing that we're looking at here from a professional perspective. Now, for most people who don't get this right, the word procrastination springs to mind. And most of us, I mean, I guess for some of us every day, but for some of us and most of us, at some point in the working week or in a month, we will feel as though we're procrastinating. So we're kind of feeling a little overdone. We're feeling like underprepared. We're feeling as though we've got just too much stuff to fit into the time available. So we kind of start to make excuses or sit there not really prioritizing or making any progress forward. So we've got 3 quick tips here just to get us kind of warmed up and started before I share a whole host of techniques that are going to help you with your time management. So the first tip for avoiding procrastination, so literally getting us to the starting line, is to break tasks, bigger projects and campaigns, for example, into smaller steps. Larger tasks will often feel overwhelming, and just that feeling of overwhelmed can lead to procrastination. It's almost like we make an excuse that, oh, it's just too hard to do. It's just, we're not going to be able to achieve it. We kind of then talk ourselves out of stuff. So break tasks down into smaller steps to make them more manageable. It makes them less daunting and helps you get started more easily. Because as we know, momentum is about the building of speed and pace in an appropriate manner. And once you're started, a little bit like when you're driving a car, it's far easier to move from 5 to 10 miles an hour than it is to get the car from 0, a standing start, to 5 miles an hour. That is momentum. So avoiding procrastination by doing little steps is really key. Second step in our 3 quick steps for avoiding procrastination is the 2 minute rule. If a task can be done in 2 minutes or less, do it right now. Okay, it's a simple, simple trick to really kind of getting things moving in a day where you're just thinking, oh, I'm not really up for it, or oh, there's just too much on, or oh, it's Friday afternoon, I haven't really got the motivation. If there are things on your plate or in your inbox or in your task list that can be done in 2 minutes or less, just do them. Just do them. It helps prevent small tasks from piling up and does encourage then you to take and build the momentum to tackle the larger things. It is incredible how almost infectious doing the 2 minute rule can become, because you just find yourself on the treadmill. You find yourself actually making progress. You don't even realize you're doing it. It's a really key little tip that can really work. And once you get started, if you're then in flow, you can use something called the Pomodoro technique, which is about working in focus bursts. Now, lots of us don't have hugely long or significant attention spans. We find our minds drift. If you're anything like me, when I'm reading an article or something, I find myself, oh, he's gone again. And he kind of drifted off. And I'm thinking about what I'm going to cook for the meal this evening, or I'm thinking about, oh, what are we doing this weekend, or things like that. To avoid those moments and procrastination, if you work in focus bursts, you can decide for yourself whether it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or Pomodoro technique gives an example of 25 minutes in many examples, followed by a short break. So, for example, if you were to block your time out for a day in 30-minute blocks, 25 minutes is production and creativity and doing stuff, and then a 5-minute break to take a walk, get away from your screen, to maybe walk around the block, maybe go make a coffee, go and talk to somebody. That 5-minute break means that you then come back ready and refreshed and rebooted for the next 25-minute block. It does create a sense of urgency. It does help you to keep distractions at bay, and it will make it easier for you to stay on task. So research Pomodoro technique. It is very, very good for those of us who kind of struggle to keep the momentum going. It's just a natural psychological technique that can keep us really focused as we go through the day. So now we're up to the starting gate. We're on the starting line. So now we're going to start to work from not a position of procrastinating and not doing stuff. We're going to work from a position of we've got a lot of things to cover here. Okay, so let's think about these 15 steps to effectively managing your time. Now, some of these will resonate. Some of these, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but some of these will resonate and we'll feel, oh, yeah, I could try that one. That's a good one. And others will just go straight past you and you think, it's not really for me. That is totally fine. The trick is not to do all 15. It's to resonate with the ones that resonate. It's to try the ones that just jump out to you and say, hey, this is you, isn't it? Those are the ones to then focus on. First step, quick win technique. So if you've got a long list of items in your task list, break them down into 3 categories. Each one goes into one of the 3 categories of must, should, or could. Now, you've got to be ruthless here, because otherwise everything ends up in the must category. That is simply not true, though, is it? If you're being really, really honest and really, really ruthless here, some of the things that you've got on your list are, yeah, I should do those things. They're not a must. They're not absolutely business critical, but I should do them. Given the right kind of, time and resource and energy, yeah, I should do those things. They would make a difference. And some of the things will be in the, well, I could do those things. They're probably less significant than the shoulds, because I should do those, but they're definitely not a must. They are a could. And maybe we'll save those for a rainy day. The trick is to be ruthless. If you can break down a big long list into must, should, could, doesn't mean you're not going to do the coulds, but it just puts them in their rightful place, allowing you to focus on the musts, because those you must do. And then you can do the little clever technique, which takes us on to the next level, which is the now, soon, later. And you can decide what you mean by soon and later. Your timescales may not be the same as mine, so I don't want to prescribe how soon is, or how much later is. You can figure that bit out. But if you take the items that are in your must category and then break those down into things I must do now, of course, those are your absolute critical tasks, Things that are must, but they can be done soon. They're must, so you're going to do them, but you can kind of afford to leave those until after the ones that need to be done now. And then the must category that are going to be done later, you're still going to do them. You're just not going to do them right here, right now. And you're probably going to leave them till after the soon ones. And then you'll come on to the should category, and then you'll do the coulds if you've got time. It is a very natural, very kind of well balanced, and it is a very commercially focused way of doing things because you can decide based on your priorities, based on your objectives, based on what tasks you're being set, what things go in which box. Must, should, could, and then breaking the musts down into now, soon, and later. And that will give you a semblance of control. That is, for me, the number one prioritization technique on the planet. That one really resonates for me. There are many others, and we'll focus on those too. But for me, this is the key one, the must, should, could. I find myself using that pretty much daily when I've got a lot on. Tip number two, step number two to effective time management is planning by the smart value of output, not the time. Okay, think about that for a minute. We often, when we kind of prioritizing stuff, think, okay, how long's that one going to take me? Okay, how long's that going to take me? Okay, well, I'll get some of these quick things in first. So I've done those, and then I'm going to focus on the big task. Is that really a smart use of time? Is that investing your time wisely? I would probably argue no. By planning by the use of smart value of output means if I do this particular activity and it's going to take me this amount of time, the value of that time, because of the output that I'll get or the outcome that that activity is going to give me, is better as an output or an outcome in a smart sense. So it's really smart decision than the other things I could be doing. So it isn't necessarily when you're managing time about the time itself. It can be about the outcomes and the outputs. So if there's something in that must category that you think, do you know, if I was to do that right now, and I really must do that right now because, or I must kind of prioritize that as the most important because of reasons X, Y, and Z, then actually it's the output of that thing, not the time it's going to take, that is the reason why I'm prioritizing it as a must and as a must now. So this is the kind of key to really effective time management and really the effective use of time within big projects. You see very effective project managers, event managers, campaign managers who just seem to be able to eat a campaign for dinner, and just be able to produce so much stuff. It is because they're using this technique of the smart value of the output, not just the time. They're aware of the time, but they don't get too kind of caught up in it. They're not so bothered about how long that's going to take me. They just know the value of that is so important that I need to prioritize it. So it's kind of putting time in its rightful place, actually, in the decision making. That's really important. Step 3 in our 15 steps is recognizing that most of the time, and come on, let's be honest, I bet you're thinking this too, we underestimate the time required to do something. I mean, when you watch the TV show Grand Designs, you can guarantee as they're planning this lovely new self-built house and the kind of the camera pans around the beautiful scene of the clear field. They haven't actually broken ground yet. They haven't started building, and they say, yeah, we've got a timeline of a year. And then Kevin McLeod comes back 2 years later and they still haven't finished building because of the whole host of things that were going to kind of crop up. He knew that was going to happen, but they didn't. They couldn't see it. And why? Because they underestimated the time required. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to overestimate. It's just about being realistic. And it's about being patient as well. For most of us, when we underestimate the amount of time required, it's because we're being impatient. So patience is absolutely key when you're managing your time. So no matter what technique you use, make sure you're very, very mindful of the amount of time it's very likely to take, even if you're prioritizing the output of that particular activity, as we saw in step 2. So don't underestimate the time required. You don't want to be rushing this stuff. You want to give it your fair attention and the value of your investment in the time to get the best possible output. So don't underestimate. Another effective technique, technique number four, step number four, is the effort return equation. Now, this one's a really interesting one because you can, even if you decide you're not going to use the previous techniques, you're going to really focus on this one. This one can be a standalone if you like to explore and experiment with it. So the effort return equation is very, very simple. Really isn't rocket science, but it is something that most people, when they're making decisions and prioritizing, kind of really forget. The idea is basically, can you see quick wins? In other words, the return relative to the amount of effort is actually a lot greater. So in other words, and you often hear this called the low-hanging fruit. People often say, like, let's pick the low-hanging fruit. It's a bit of a metaphor for saying it's the things that will return some stuff for the least amount of effort. And again, some people are very, very good at this. They always seem to choose the right stuff. And it's because they know that it's the stuff that is very little effort, very little, impact on resources and investment of time. And actually, I'm going to get something out of it. It doesn't have to be a big return. As long as the effort is significantly and proportionately less, it could be something worth doing. So you might find if you do those little quick 2-minute tasks, the return effort is a nice balance rather than the amount of effort I'm having to put into this thing based on the return of value I'm getting back or the output. It's actually not worth my time. You want to be switching that. You want to be doing things that give you the best return for the minimal output that you can do. Because then, of course, in marketing and business speak, we get our great ROI, return on investment. So it could be return on investment financially, but here we're looking about our time ROI, our time return on investment of time. This is the effort return equation. Have a little play with that. Think about the tasks you've got left to do today and think about which ones are going to give me the best return for the least effort. Then I can start to make decisions. So can you start now to see how some of these things kind of work together to give you this ROI? Because step 5 really is understanding the true definition of ROI. It's about balancing effort and reward, effort and return. People on the stock market, on the trading floor of the stock markets, they know how to do this. They know that they're going to minimize the risk. They're going to use as few resources as possible. They're going to get something for the best price, and they're looking for the best return. It is their job. But if you think about it, from you personally, it's your job to invest your time because, like I said right at the start, you don't get these hours and these minutes back ever. That's quite a profound moment, isn't it, really, when you think about it? So isn't it better to really be thinking about this true definition of return on your investment of time? Think about the things that you're doing and really value the things that give you the best return, because that is true time ROI. Step 6 comes back to being a little bit more practical again. Having one list is the key. There's a lot of research and a lot of things, a lot of articles and things. If you look about this, having one list in time management, you'll see a lot of writers, a lot of people have kind of worked on this. And there is one rule which kind of probably supersedes everything else, which is the 1-3-5 rule. If you've got a lot of lists, you are going to struggle. Already you can probably see that you kind of need the one list so you can do must, should, could. You can do that return effort equation. But if you've got lots of lists and you're kind of pointing here and you're pointing there, really hard to see the wood from the trees, very hard to kind of get consistent. So think about having one list. Have a 1-3-5 list. One big thing, 3 medium things, and then maybe 5 small things. That apparently, according to the research, is it's the sweet spot. So when you're thinking about your must, should, could, if you're finding that you've got a whole host of things in the must pile, then maybe it is you're needing to be a little bit more ruthless and put more stuff into the should, or you've just got too much on your plate. And we'll talk about resource allocation in just a moment, how you can use others to be a more effective time manager. But think about your current lists. 1 big thing, 3 medium things, 5 small things. Psychologically, you can make progress with the 1-3-5 rule. Anything more than that, or anything more unbalanced than that, 5 big things, 2 small things, Well, just intuitively, that doesn't feel right. So this is the sweet spot. So again, look at the list that you've got of things for the rest of today or things that you're going to be planning in for next week and just think for a moment, how does that balance? Could I kind of reinvent my list there? And stuff that doesn't make the must category. Well, Neil said actually that's the should. So I need to kind of just wait on those for a minute and see if any then do migrate towards must. That's fine. But as long as I don't overdo my 1-3-5 rule, then at least I've got some kind of control. Now, you might be listening to this thinking, okay, that's all very well for you to say, Neil. You might be managing your own time. You might be your own boss. I've got somebody who is breathing down my neck, giving me all these extra tasks. And of course, this is where being a really effective time manager needs to factor in this word resource. You need to be thinking of the resource filter as you start to do your priorities. So the questions that you need to ask when you're doing your filtering, when you're doing your must, should, could, when you're doing your effort return equation is, what resources have I got here that I could use to solve some of these challenges, that I could use to reprioritize, that I could use to kind of do some of the should things whilst I focus on the musts? Well, wouldn't that be interesting? So think about resources. So resources are people, budget, and time. So think about your time resource here. Is it just you? Could you outsource some of these things? Could you delegate some of these things? Could you do some of these things in collaboration to speed them up or to get a more effective output that gives you better value for the time that you're going to be spending? Think creatively. If you're sat there thinking, well, I am at the bottom of the food chain here in my organization, everything ends with me, I don't have any direct line reports, I have to do all this stuff myself, I'm going to challenge you and say, do you? Do you really? Could you do stuff in collaboration? Could you outsource some stuff? You can definitely prioritize. And maybe this is time to have a conversation with anybody who is breathing down your neck and saying, look, I've got all these tasks on here. This is how I'm prioritizing them. This is how I'm allocating my time to the things that I've been given to do. What do you think? And then the person who is breathing down your neck will then look at that list and think, oh yeah, actually, yeah, now you're showing me that. That is quite a lot of stuff. Well, actually, those things there in the should box, yeah, well, we'll give those to Bob over there, or yeah, well, Mary could look after those over there. So we'll kind of start to kind of rework them. You will find that that will happen. There will be so many moments where the clarity of the reality of the situation will then, supersede any kind of expectation of pushing just too much in your direction. So use the resource filter to try and figure out if there are alternative ways of getting through this list, of getting through these priorities. And of course, this introduces step 8, which is setting and agreeing clear boundaries, knowing that no matter how many times your line manager or your boss or anybody else tells you, can you just do this extra thing? I know you're full. I know you're really busy, but could you just do this for me? Of course, there is no such word as just, is there? It means, can you do this for me? And we've all heard it. We've all experienced it. I've got clients who ask me to do that. I've had, people sort of I've worked with before, facing that kind of situation. So I know exactly what we're talking about here. But by setting and agreeing clear boundaries and negotiating the kind of priorities that you have, your allocation of time, because nobody, despite their best endeavors, can create time. Time is one of these universal laws, one of these universal things that we are all subservient to. So yes, you can get more efficient. Yes, you can get better outcomes. Yes, you can get better ROI of your time, but you can't create time. You can't make time happen. You say, well, okay, yeah, but I could work evenings and weekends. Yeah, but that's still time. It's still a finite resource. And of course, burnout will happen if you start doing that. So agreeing clear boundaries and negotiating the use of your time, which is the most precious asset that you have, and actually that your organization has with you in it as well. So it's really important that you set and agree these boundaries and keep negotiating them. Keep saying, okay, I'm very happy to do that additional task that I've just been given, but please be aware, this one here is going to get replaced for now whilst I do this. Are you happy with that? So what you're not doing is just saying no. You're saying no with a caveat, or you're saying, okay, but here's the plan, here's the kind of contingency, or here's the impact of and the consequence of me saying yes to this is that this other thing is going to move. It's going to move from my must now into must later, or it's going to move from must later into should, because of the finite essence of time. And don't let anybody tell you that you can make more time. You can't. You can allocate and prioritize more effectively. But once you've done that and you've proven that and negotiated it, then you know what your full physical limit is. And that can't be negotiated. So that's a key thing to bear in mind. This is way beyond you and me. It's way beyond your line manager. It's way beyond humanity. Time is a finite resource. And with that in mind, I think there is a sensitivity here at point 9 of our 15 steps, is this whole idea of the concept of out of office. You can put on that email sort of setting which says out of office, I'm not contactable, but if an emergency, blah, blah, blah. Or, I'm actually on holiday this week, so please contact my colleague, or et cetera, et cetera. When you put on an out of office, either physically or virtually, because maybe you're doing a course. I mean, obviously, a lot of you listening to this will be doing some kind of study. So therefore, if you are studying and you say, no, this is my study period, this is when I'm doing my studies, put an out of office on and truly mean that you are out. It doesn't mean you've left the organization. It doesn't mean you're not coming back. It doesn't mean that you don't care. You should not feel subservient to that word out. You should not feel obliged to just keep your teams on just in case somebody needs you urgently. No, the world will carry on. If you make it very, very clear when you are coming back and you are next available to allocate your time to the task, to the project, to the campaign, then that is a fair negotiation of your time. So make out of office truly mean out. Don't do a compromise, because you know as well as I do what's going to happen. You're just going to get that little just interruption, and that little just interruption starts to grow. It starts to get its own snowball effect. It becomes bigger, becomes longer, becomes more detailed, and before you know it, oh, there's my study time gone. I'm just using study time as an example. It could be your weekend. It could be your evening. It could be your private time. It could be really important leisure time that you really need because you've had a long week. Make out truly mean out. It's really, really key. And of course, what this does, it gives us our step 10 in our 15 steps, which is really recognizing the difference between urgent and important. These are not the same thing. A lot of people who are not that good at time management, or leaders or managers who are, probably not that effective in their role. And I'm being brutally honest here that, this is the reality in lots of organizations, not all, of course, but in lots of organizations where there's this blurring of urgent and important. You might get a request that comes in that says, oh, it's really urgent. It's really important that you kind of do this. And you think, well, one, it's really late. You probably knew about this last week. So for me, it's actually not that urgent. It's urgent now for you because you didn't remember to do it or you didn't brief it in. Is it important? Well, it's probably important you get some kind of output, but actually in my category of important, look, I'm looking down my list, it's not actually that important. Now, that doesn't make you an inhibitor. It doesn't make you a blocker. It doesn't make you a bottleneck. If you continue to serve people who don't understand the difference between urgent and important, they are going to continue to wreck and ruin your priority list. So this is about being really strong and clear. This is about putting those boundaries in, but being really, really open about how and when and why you are doing your priorities. And somebody else's urgency, somebody else's importance isn't necessarily yours to take on. And again, when you're in a service role, and I know I've got clients who will say to me, oh, Neil, this is like really urgent. We need to get this out by 5 o'clock. I had one yesterday who came through and said, oh, can you get this done by 1 p.m.? It was 11 a.m. and I was in an all-day workshop, and it was like, so I dropped them back a quick message and said, there is no way this is happening. I'm sorry, you've given me 2 hours notice for this thing. And actually, do you know what happens? They come back and say, Well, actually, as long as you could give it back to me by first thing tomorrow, that would actually be okay. So often there's a lot of kind of blustery kind of, bravado with this whole urgent and important thing. Often that can actually be something that can get misconstrued. It isn't always the same. So I would always say that with those kinds of things, um, it is very important to just kind of remember that, you can, should you choose to do so, you can actually make some of those things really, yeah, kind of on your terms. It is something that's, really quite interesting. So the whole idea of your lack of planning does not constitute my emergency. Yeah, that's, yeah, so whoever just put that into the chat. Yeah, it's absolutely correct. I mean, that is what we're talking about here. It is a hard one to say. You've got to be confident. You've got to be, quite self-assured to be able to say that, particularly to somebody who is a little bit more senior to you. But it's really important. Use your prioritization, use your lists as the kind of the evidence that says, okay, we need to negotiate here because there's an impact and a consequence. Let's talk about it. And so you can then use the evidence of your planning to be able to help you in that conversation and really argue your case. And often you'll find actually it works out quite well. And the other person then learns and understands. So they do it differently next time, which is, after all, really what you're after. Step 11 in our 15 steps to effective time management is the binary prioritization process. Now, this one was taught to me by somebody called Jim Hardcastle, who used to work with me. And this one is one that I think I'm going to take to the grave. It is such a clean, clear, clever process in terms of effective prioritization of a big long list of stuff, things to do. And typically, if you're going to use some sticky notes, post-it notes to do this, it works really, really well because you can move them around. The trick in a binary prioritization process, bit of a mouthful, but it's really, really simple. You're making a decision based on a simple yes or no, this one or this one. So binary, it's either this one or this one. Simple, single decision making. So what you do is you write down all of your tasks on individual post-it notes. So everything that you're going to do. So this might be you've put them into their must, should, and could boxes, and they're all in kind of post-it notes. And then you think, okay, I've now got to prioritize all my musts. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the binary prioritization process. So I'm going to take one of those post-its and I'm going to put it in the middle of a flip chart, or I'm going to put it on the wall or on my desk in front of me. Then I'm going to take another one, random other one, and I'm going to say, is this one more or less important to do than the first one? Okay, well, that one's less important. Okay, so it goes underneath. You then take the next one, random post-it, and you say, okay, based on the one I've just put down, is it more or less important than that particular one that I've just put down? Oh, it's more important than that. Okay, so you put it down there. And then you can say, well, is it more or less important than the one above in my list as I'm building this thing kind of vertically down my page or my desk? Oh, it's more important than that. Okay, so it goes above it. And so you continue on. That binary process, rather than sort of saying, well, it's all important, it's all really urgent, allows you to actually get a list. And you are not allowed, by the way, to say, well, this one's equally as important as that. You're not allowed to do that. Nothing is equal. You have to make the binary decision. So even if it's only a fraction more, just intuitively, you've got no evidence that it's more important, but you just think it might be a little more important, that's where it sits. Now, if you're doing this with a team, it can work really effectively. If you're doing this as a brainstorm exercise with a group, if you're doing it with clients or customers, it's a great way. You could do this as a focus group and say, look, we're doing this kind of focus group with some customers doing some research. Is like, can we actually get these features of this product that we're testing? Can we actually find these features in priority order? So use the binary prioritization process to do that. It gives you the definitive answer as to what's most important. And of course, if we're doing it with time, as we are talking about here, it's a really clean, neat way of making those decisions really, really cleverly. And then step 12 is making sure that your SMART goals are aligned as the filter for that binary process decision making. Because, of course, what are you kind of critiquing post-it 1 versus post-it 2 against? Well, it is your SMART goals. It could be the higher purpose that your organization or you personally have. That is a key filter for your effective time management. And in very simple terms, what we're saying is this task that I'm looking to prioritize here, or this thing I'm going to be doing over the next hour, is this taking me closer to my goals? Is it working in the direction of my higher purpose? Or is it taking me in the other direction? Or is it taking me off piste and away from the path that I should be on? That filter alone, is it taking me closer to my goal or making me further away from my goal, is a great way of filtering stuff from the must category into even should, or even beyond into could. And particularly if you're looking at your should list, a lot of those things in that should list are not necessarily going to serve your longer game. And if they don't, they go into the could list. Okay, so we're getting a little bit more sophisticated here as we start to build this as we go. So now what we've got is this lovely list. We've got our lovely 135. We've got our must, should, could. We've got the now, soon, later into play. We've negotiated it with our line manager. We've got our time ready to invest. And then we sit there and we think, right, okay, I kind of believe it, but now I'm looking at it, oh, I'm not so sure. And then what happens? We don't eat that frog. Now, eat that frog was a phrase that a lot of people have been using prior to Brian Tracy, who is a great kind of management consultant of many, many decades experience, who wrote a book called Eat That Frog, which was one of the most effective tools in time management, which doesn't actually involve eating frogs, you'd be very glad to hear, but he talks a lot about tackling the hardest task at peak performance. So it doesn't mean you've got to then reshuffle everything just to find your hardest task. But what it means is that if on your priority list, you've got a particularly hard task, something that's going to challenge you professionally or personally, or it's just going to stretch you beyond what you might be able to produce normally, then that is your frog. And what he would say is that you need to be tackling that at a point in your day or a day in your week when you are going to be at peak performance. In other words, some of us are morning people, some of us are afternoon people, and that can be quite well defined, and that can really impact on our outputs and our performance. So if you are very much a morning person and you like to hit the ground running, you get your first coffee, you hit the day, but by lunchtime you're pretty burnt out, and so you're actually not that productive, you would not be then doing your most important, significant, hardest task at the end of the afternoon. You're going to do it first thing. And consequently, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, you're going to be doing it at the other end of the day. So figuring out and really being mindful, going within yourself to the human within you. A lot of this is process. A lot of this is talking about time, but you're within this time. It's about investing your time. So think about, when do I perform best? When do I get the best feedback? When do I get my best results? When do I just feel most comfortable tackling these tough tasks? So when am I going to eat that frog? And in every single, metaphorically speaking, of course, but every single task list, every single priority order that you create will have one thing on there that is probably more challenging than the other stuff. So even though you specify now, soon, later, etc., some things might just buck the trend. And those will be the things that I would encourage you very clearly to do at the right time of the day. So have a little search on Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy, and you'll find a lot more tips. You don't necessarily have to buy the book. There's a lot of stuff online. He does a lot of videos. But Brian is a really, really good thinker. He's got a lot of techniques in terms of effective time management. So he goes way beyond that. But that's a really, really important one I wanted you to think about, is kind of from this list, which is a little bit maybe artificial away from us as humans, which are the things that intuitively feel like they should be done at certain times, and factoring that into the mix as well. The penultimate step in our 15 steps to effective time management is knowing when the task is actually finished. You know, if you, a little bit like me, are a little bit of a perfectionist, you like to kind of get things looking about as good as they could, it is actually knowing that the Pareto principle is way more significant than you. And it's way more significant than me. Pareto principle, if you're not aware of it, Pareto, the 80-20 rule, as it's normally called, from the economist, 19th century economist Pareto, Italian philosopher, if you could call him that, who found this sort of 80-20 rule applies to everything. And it applies to the effective use of time as well. So what it's saying is basically that 80% through your task, you're pretty much done. Because the final 20%, that fettling with those final little details, generally as little, if any, value to the overall value of the outcome. So just stop. When you're 80% done, you are usually done. Take a look back at some of the stuff you've done, the latest report that you produced, the latest article that you did, the meeting that you had, which ran for an hour when actually it could have finished after about 45 minutes, maybe. That is a good, clear indicator that those last 20% of whatever you're talking about, including your time, is generally wasted. So making sure that you recognize a task is normally finished within 80% of its boundary is a great way to get a little bit of spare time back, to reflect on what I do differently, to measure the effectiveness of that particular outcome, etc., etc. Or maybe just going to make yourself another coffee. What's not to like about getting a little bit of a burst of free time or spare time? That's obviously what we're after. And the final thing to say on our 15 steps to effective management, my final sort of tip here would be that you do need to constantly adjust and work with your lists, work with the time allocation that you've prioritized and that you've agreed. Things are never set in stone. Time is one of those very fluid things. When you're on holiday, the first week, if you're going on a 2-week holiday, the first week seems to just kind of spread itself out in the distance and you can't even feel like you were anywhere else. And then the second week seems to race through. Time is not equal. Even though there are 24 hours in the day and there are 60 minutes to every hour, they don't all feel the same. And that is because, from a human perspective, they aren't. So you are going to need to do daily, if not hourly, adjustments to reprioritize your list. Don't just keep adding to it, keep reviewing it, keep revisiting it. Make it part of the kind of daily activities that you do to get into a really good habit for working with effective time management, because that is actually investing. It's not using it as a tool or a technique that is there to kind of use your time, spend your time. This is proper investment of time. So this is the difference. People who are the most effective time managers are the ones who constantly are revisiting and reprioritizing. It becomes just part of what they do. It doesn't become an onerous task. It's just blended in with everything else. So it becomes actually quite pleasant, because then you feel a sense of control. You feel a sense of, ownership of the time, which of course, as we know, is very much yours. Now, there are a host of different tools and apps and scheduling systems and software that you can use if you want a little bit of help with this stuff. A lot of these do use the functionality, or they create functionality of a lot of these techniques and steps that we've been talking about. Now, some of you will know some of these tools. Trello is a very, very popular one. Todoist is another one, which is a really good task manager that allows you to kind of prioritize time. So that's one worth having a little look at as well. Asana, which is really designed for teams, but actually, if you want to go into this and really, really do this in terms of filters, working with workflows, and actually having a tool that is there to kind of almost, plan out your kind of every waking moment, then Asana can work actually really, really well for you as an individual as well. And it does allow you to work on the most important tasks. So it has the same kind of filters inbuilt in there that we've been talking about. So have a little check out of Asana. Clockify is really good if you want to actually get a real grasp of where you are right now. Because for a lot of people, if you're kind of new to this time management idea, it's hard to kind of figure out accurately, well, what's my baseline? Where am I actually starting this from? So Clockify is actually a good little tracking tool that allows you to monitor actually where your time is being spent, and then helps you to understand just how long specific tasks take rather than guesswork. Because remember, with the guesswork that we do, we know we underestimate time naturally as humans. So Clockify can give you that kind of reality check, if you like. and also Rescue Time as well, which is an app that runs in the background and tracks your activities to give you, again, a nice kind of overview, particularly if you're using a lot of apps on your smartphone or your tablet or your laptop. It can give you a real kind of sense of how those are kind of interacting. And it may well be that, it shows some nice little insights of things that, you're not aware of because you're just busy doing the tasks. And I just used a word there that probably is the antithesis of really effective time management, the word busy. I've taken the word busy out of my narrative. I do not use the word in my vocabulary, the word busy. I can use the word full. I can use the word hectic if it's one of those days, few and far between. Full I love because it means, yeah, I'm getting the most out of every day. As soon as I feel myself drawn to use the word busy, it's giving me a very, very clear sign that actually I'm not managing my time effectively. To be busy means that you are chasing stuff, you're not in control. So try, if you can, to just review the word busy. You might love it. It might give you a buzz and energize you. For me, it's a very negative word, just doesn't fit and sit with me. So just review and reflect on the word busy, because for me, that's one of the clear indicators of when we've got it right, but also when we've got it wrong. So I hope you found that a useful kind of little dipping the toe in the water for effective time management, particularly for us really full, I was going to say the word busy there, but us really full marketers who clearly have a lot of things coming at us from in lots of directions. But I hope if you can just really adopt some of those and play with some of those tools, filters, and techniques, you're going to find that you get a lot more control really over that huge, great list of activities that we all have there in front of us. If we're not connected, do connect with me. I'm always sharing kind of things that I find in my travels on these kinds of subjects. So connect with me on socials at Neil Wilkins X. And we will continue this series at the college for these kinds of professional and personal development topics and techniques over the coming weeks on our fortnightly series. So we'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time. Check out marketingcollege.com/events for all of the upcoming topics. And hopefully, if you've managed to invest enough time in your time management techniques, you'll be able to create some time to come along to the very next webinar. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for coming along. Hope you found it useful, and I'll see you here, same time, same place in a couple of weeks' time.